Cambia lo superficial, cambia también lo profundo, cambia el modo de pensar, cambia todo en este mundo. Y así como todo cambia, no es extraño que yo cambie. The superficial changes. The profound changes too. The way of thinking changes. Everything changes in this world. And as everything changes, it is not strange that I change. These are some of the lyrics of a brave song written by Chilean author Julio Numhauser in 1982 during his exile, and it was popularized and sung by Mercedes Sosa, an Argentine singer who also had to flee her country due to the dictatorship. That is what I want to talk to you about today, a change, a paradigm shift that some people are already living in. It is February 2015. I am in Vienna during one of the class breaks of the masters that I'm studying. I hear my phone buzzing. I look at the screen and I see it is my sister. And right at the moment, I know already that something's wrong. You probably know that feeling of an unexpected call at a very unexpected time. So I pick up the phone, and it is about my dad, who has just undergone a control of a surgery he has just had for a cancer. And in that control, they have found something else. It is in this very day that we get to know about the cancer that will take his life 2 years later. It might have been his genetics, but as researcher Brené Brown often says, biology loads the gun, and the environment pulls the trigger. And the environment for my dad was that of the consequences of the 2008 financial crisis. He had been battling for 7 years to try to save the family business, and unfortunately, it didn't work. And that unbearable stress took a toll on him. This is a sketch I made of him back then. So I am in this ugly corridor, like most university corridors are, full of artificial light, and I'm feeling sick and dizzy, and I'm thinking that the world that I know, in the way that I know it, it is coming to an end. Luckily for me, I started meeting people that were part of what we could call collaborative communities and networks, a whole subculture that I joined back then and haven't left since. I could live in a world with almost the opposite principles to the one that provoked my dad's death. And so for this journey of change, I bring you a quote by the late anthropologist David Graeber, who said that the ultimate hidden truth of the world is it is something that we create and could just as easily make differently. I can imagine that for him, in his genius, it was relatively easy to imagine a different world, but that for most of us, even if we constantly talk about it, it might be challenging or even impossible. So my invitation for you today is that we take one societal principle, we have a brief look at it, and then we flip it, we change it, we see what happens. The principle that I have brought to you today is this one, easy one, power. So what I'm going to say now is simplified, of course, but even if we live in democratic societies, our Western world is still organized in a power-over way. Hierarchies are the clearest example of that. A manager telling you what to do. Hierarchies deny people self-control and sovereignty. And this is what I'm telling you, it might sound maybe too extreme for some of you. And it is true that hierarchies are sometimes useful and helpful, and in some contexts they are even necessary. But it probably is because most of us in this room are whether privileged or very privileged. And so we do not suffer the worst consequences of this societal principle. But many people do. Let's go back to David Graeber's quote. And now that we know there is a principle called power over, by which we live, whether we are aware of it or not, let's choose a sort of like the opposite one, to say it in some way. And that's what I bring to you now, and let's have a look how could such a world look like. Power with. Power with is a concept that was developed by Mary Parker Follett, and she was born in the second half of the 19th century. And researchers often talk about her work as having been forgotten and then refound. Forgotten because, as I have just explained, we have been working, dealing, living in a very different principle. And we're starting to understand that we need a new one. And so we are starting to apply it. But even almost more than a century later, we haven't been able to fully apply the work that she came up with. So Mary Parker Follett believed that we are relational beings. So we don't have a close or defined identity. It's that you influence me and I influence you, and we are always in this co-creation dance of becoming. And so that I say that we are relational beings is probably not a surprise to any of you, but interestingly, in the system that we are in, capitalism, it does completely the opposite. It separates us from nature, from each other, and even from our own selves. So power with is the power that emerges between people that are working together or being together from their relationships and their needs. And because we talk about relationships, we also have to include emotions. That's also something that is not acknowledged in our current system, or that is seen more as a feminine trait. And supposedly, we live more in a world of assertiveness and supposed rationality. So we are in this group of people that are dealing with their needs, and we come up with solutions through a co-creation process. That is what power with is in the end, a co-creation process. And I have spent the past decade working in networks and communities that apply power with. And I deeply believe that we are in a moment in time in which we need to relearn these deep democratic processes. And I say relearn because none of this is new. And so I wanted to bring to you an example from the collective that I am a part of, to give you a tiny little story about how can we apply such a principle to the very specifics. Fran JD and I, we are at a meeting together because we have just run an online course. And we want to have a discussion about how we distribute the money that we have made. And we're going to do so with a principle called needs-based distribution and a process called happy money story. The goal of which is that we are all happy with how we distribute our money. And I think this is such an amazing goal to have, and it sounds so obvious and so rare. And so it works like this. We start saying what are our needs. It is my turn, and I share that I have recently started studying a PhD, and so I have less time, and so my income has decreased quite a lot. They know this already, they take it openly, it is their turn, they share their needs, and then each of us make a proposal about how we think that we're going to distribute the money. And we do so with this needs-based principle, through our relationships, and we do it in contrast to what would be the usual process, which would be by contribution. By contribution, it would mean that you get the money in proportion to how much you have put in the project in terms of money or time, in expertise, knowledge, whatever. So we don't want to do that because we do not want to recreate a meritocracy. So we do this process. It's the moment in which each of us is going to share our proposals. We do that, and to my astonishment, Fran who had been the biggest contributor to the project by far, instead of claiming most of the money, she gives me most of the money that would have been for her. It's been 3 years now, and it still blows my mind that someone outside of my closest circle cares for me so much and cares for the organization so much that she gives me most of the money that would have been for her. And I feel loved. I feel that we really, really are in this together. And it helps me heal one of the deep beliefs that I have, that is that I am alone and I have to achieve everything on my own. So through this tiny little story, you get to see some of the elements of how is it that we work together. Here you can find some keywords. We do not create processes for control. Instead, we create containers for emergence, which means that we work with what is there, including emotions. And for that, we care a lot about the relationships between us, between people. We didn't learn the happy money story or the needs-based distribution principle, so we didn't come up with it ourselves, but we learned it from 2 different networks. And there are many, many more, hundreds, probably thousands of networks worldwide working not only to create a better future, but a better here and now by the way we collaborate and interact with each other. These are just some examples. And it is not only alternative organizations. More and more traditional ones are jumping in this journey. It is true that some of them do it because of employee motivation and retention and other incentives they might see in it. But luckily, the most people I work with, they do so because they believe in human potential and in a more equitable society. Power With can help us build the basis of one such society. I started talking about my dad, and I want to finish with my 3-month-old baby daughter. And probably I will not see a paradigm shift towards a Power With-based society during my lifetime. When I feel optimistic, I think that maybe she will. But in any case, I want us to get closer to living in the here and now, in the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, as thinker Charles Eisenstein says. Everything changes. Alles ändert sich. Todo cambia. Thank you.